How's it going, guys? Welcome to the first lesson of online college algebra. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to kind of review some topics that you guys have seen in Algebra 2 and talk about the real number system and classifying numbers and absolute value. So, it shouldn't be too difficult today. There's a paper assignment that you will complete that's about, I don't know, 6 questions long. I can't remember the exact number, but it's not very long. So, I'll post that on there as well with this video. And if you have any questions over any of it or something doesn't work, please let me know and I will do my best to fix it. All right, so what we're talking about today, like I said, is the basics of algebra. So learning targets are you're going to represent and classify real numbers, and we're also going to talk about the absolute value of real numbers and find the distance between two real numbers. So the first thing is just to talk about the different classifications. I'm going to start from the lowest classification up to the highest. So the first one is natural numbers, and the symbol looks like this. All right, it's your counting numbers. The big thing that you need to know with this is there are no decimals. And it's only positive numbers as well. So examples of counting numbers would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The reason why we call them counting numbers is think about it, whenever you learn to count, you start with 1 and you go up. So that's your natural numbers. Now whole numbers is the next set. So again, we're building on natural numbers. So whole numbers are natural numbers and 0. So again, no decimals, only positive, but now instead of saying only positive, we also include 0. So the examples would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And that's going to go on forever. All right, the next one would be integers, and their symbol is just the z. The reason why whole numbers is z positive is because we're talking about the positive numbers, so integers is also going to include negative numbers. So examples of this, it's still no decimals, but we're building on whole numbers. So now I have -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, right? And I can go to -100, I can go to +100, as long as it is a counting number that is negative or positive, and you can also include 0 in that integer subset. The next thing is going to be rational numbers. Their symbol is a Q. It's kind of the weird one. Its numbers expressed in the form where P and Q are integers. It can be expressed as repeating or terminating decimals. So some examples, there's a bunch out there, but I'm just going to give you a few. 2/3, right? That's a fraction. That one works. 0.4, that's a decimal that ends. The number 10 is also an example. -12 is an example. Or if it has a repeating decimal, that one works as well. So that's rational numbers. So integers, whole, and natural are all considered rational numbers. Irrational is kind of its own set. So again, we're working backwards, but irrational is anything that's going to have a decimal that goes on forever and doesn't repeat. All right, so examples of this would be pi, because that decimal goes on forever. The square root of 2, the square root of 3, something that's not a perfect square root. Or they'll give you an example like this, and they'll say ... That means that decimal goes on forever, right? There is no repeating, so that means it's irrational. And lastly, you have real numbers, which are represented by an R. Okay, and that's any number that can be modeled on the number line. I will tell you this, for right now, every number we work with, unless it's undefined, is going to be a real number. However, we do get into imaginary numbers later on. So for now, we're just going to say all the above examples are real numbers. All right, and I think the easiest way to think about this is you start at the top and you work your way down. So whenever we get a number, we ask ourselves, is it a real number? That's our first question. Well, for the most part, every number we work with in the first unit, it's going to be a real number, unless it's undefined. So then you work your way down. So now the next question is, after it's real, I got to ask myself, is it rational or is it irrational? All right. If it's rational, you can classify it further, possibly. If it's irrational, you just stop there. So I would say real and irrational and stop. If it's rational, I go real, rational, and then the next step would be integers. So then I ask myself, is it an integer? If it is, then maybe it could be a whole number. And then lastly, maybe it could be a natural number. So there's a progression to this. You just got to ask yourself, does it work for that set? So we'll do some examples. I want you guys to try a couple by yourself. But the first one's -12. I encourage you to pause the video and try and classify it. So you start with real numbers. Is it a real number? Well, we would say yes, it's a real number. Now I got to ask myself, is it rational or irrational? Well, irrational means a decimal that goes on forever. -12, there's a decimal, but it ends, right? So I'm going to say it's rational because I have a decimal that ends, right? We read it right here. We just don't put it in there. Now I got to ask myself, is it an integer? So is it a negative number or a positive number or 0 that has no decimal? Well, in this case, it's a negative number without a decimal, right? So it's a integer. Now I go to the next one. Is it a whole number? Well, does it go 0 and then positive? It's a negative number, so it can't be a whole number, so I just stop there, and that's how I would classify it, as those three things. All right? This one's a very important example. If it is undefined, so if I type this into my calculator and I get undefined, that's how you classify it. You classify it as undefined for right now because it's not a real number. On the other hand, though, if you type it in and you get 0, sometimes you might have to simplify the number. Well, 0 I can work with. That's a real number. That's a rational number. That's an integer because 0 is included in an integer. That's a whole number because 0 is included in wholes. And then, is it a natural number? Is it a counting number? No, so I stop there. That's how I would classify it. And lastly, if you see any number with pi in it, you automatically know it's real and irrational because that decimal is going to go on forever. All right, so that's just a few examples that you will see later on whenever we get into the Hawks. Lastly, we have absolute values. So how do we find the distance between 2 points on a number line? If A and B are any 2 points on the number line, then the distance between A and B is, you subtract A minus B and you solve it. Remember, absolute value is always positive. All right, so I'm going to write that out to the side. On the inside. So like if I had -12, that's a positive 12. That's the distance. So example, this first one, your answer should be 10. The next one, it gets a little bit harder. So I want to do the inside first. Absolute value -20 is 20. However, there's a negative on the outside. So my answer would be -20. I keep going. You do the absolute value that's on the inside first. So I get 3 minus 2. Because this negative is going to stay there still. And then I would get 3 minus 2 is 1. The absolute value of 1 is 1. And they'll give you an example like this. Find the distance between -2 and 15 on the number line. You just take the first number minus the second number. Absolute value of that. And that's the distance between those 2 points. And that's pretty much it for the first lesson. The big things that I need done. If you do not have the form filled out for Truman State, you need to get that done because I have to know who's going to be in the class for my online. Also, it will tell you payment dates on there and you have to fill out the agreements, and I've already talked about that in the syllabus and everything on the first day. However, if you have any questions over anything or your parents do or whoever, please let me know and I'll answer those questions. That's pretty much it, I think. The last thing would be complete the homework assignment, and then we will go from there. All right? Again, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm here to help.